Uh, Welcome to the module on non-conventional trademarks and domain name. Firstly, we will discuss non-conventional trademarks like olfactory marks, sound marks, color marks, shape marks, and then we'll discuss about domain name and trademark protection. To begin with non-conventional trademarks, there are many non-conventional trademarks, but today's presentation will focus on 4 specific ones, which are olfactory marks, sound marks, color marks, shape marks. The key requirements before we begin to understand the various trademarks is non-conventional marks is the key requirement to register a trademark is that it has to be distinctive, that the mark has to be distinctive, and it should be capable of graphical representation. Now, a non-conventional trademark could be distinctive in character. The problem that a non-conventional trademark actually runs into is usually with regard to graphical representation. Let's look at why we have graphical representation. Graphical representation of the sign usually enables people to know precisely what mark is actually protected, right? The entry of the mark in the public register has the aim of actually making it accessible to authorities and the public. It also avoids any element of subjectivity in the process of identifying the sign. Now, let's look at smell marks as such. Common types of smell marks that have been attempted to be trademarked are smell of rose for tires, smell of freshly cut grass for tennis balls, cinnamon flavored furniture, etc. Now, the important thing to keep in mind is whether the smell is an inherent attribute or natural characteristic of the goods, whether the smell added by the applicant is to identify the goods. Will the public regard the smell as a sign which identifies the applicant's goods? Is the mark capable of being represented graphically? A very important and vital case dealing with smell marks is the case decided by the European Court of Justice, which is called as Ralph Seichmann versus Deutsche Patent and Trademark Office. Now, in this particular case, a protection was sought for the olfactory mark in the Dutch Trademark Office. Now, what was actually sought to be protected was basically a pure chemical substance called methyl cinnamate, whose structural formula is set out as C6H5CH is equal to CHCOOCH3. Basically, they claim for the pure chemical substance, methyl cinnamate, and also claim for the structural formula of the chemical substance as such. Samples of this olfactory mark were also provided to the trademark office, and it was also listed in the application that it could actually be obtained in various laboratories. Now, odor samples submitted along with the application was described as balsamically fruity with a slight hint of cinnamon. Now, question was whether this can get a trademark. When an odor is reproduced by a chemical formula, can a chemical formula be trademarked? When an odor is represented by a description, can that description be trademarked? When it is deposited, can that be trademarked? Or will a trademark be granted to a combination of above? And further question that was actually raised in this matter was whether such olfactory marks could be graphically represented. Now, courts obviously focused on the issue of graphical representation. Now, the court said trademark acted as a source identifier. Now, as a source identifier, it enabled people to actually avoid any confusion in distinguishing the products and services of one trader from that of the other. Only signs which are actually capable of being perceived visually, that is, which are actually written in terms of letters or in terms of characters or by a picture can be regarded as graphically represented. Now the big question is, can olfactory marks be graphically represented? The answer seems to be no. Now the court discussion went to the extent that the court said olfactory marks are actually inaccessible, it's not clear and precise, it is not self-contained, it is not easily accessible and intelligible, and moreover it is not durable. The reason for this is the court laid out that accessibility, clarity, precision, self-containment, intelligibility and durability are the key requirements when you look at graphical representation. So the court concluded the object of representation is specifically graphical representation is to avoid any element of subjectivity in the process of identifying and perceiving the sign. Consequently, the means of graphical representation must be unequivocal and objective. In the light of the foregoing observations, answer to the question must be that a trademark may consist of a sign which is not in itself capable of being perceived visually, provided that it can be represented graphically, particularly by means of images, lines, or characters. Court here seems to kind of very clearly lay out that to be graphically represented, it must be possible to kind of represent it in the form of images, lines, or characters. And further, it said it must be clear, precise, self-contained, easily accessible, intelligible, durable, and objective. Now, in the instance of methyl cyanamide being represented in the form of characters, that is, in terms of written words, it does not clearly represent what the odor smells like. Further, with the chemical formula, very few people who are trained in chemistry, organic chemistry, can actually recognize what that formula stands for, and as such, it was not sufficient and clear and precise. Subsequently, it was also clear that any form of submission of the sample in laboratories or in the form of a deposit to the trademark office would not suffice, for the simple reason that samples over a period of time, when get exposed to the nature, the odor smell could obviously change, and as such it may not be easily discernible as to what the original sample was and subsequently what it is. Right? As a result, the court ruled that balsamically fruity with a slight hint of cinnamon was not clear, precise, or objective, but was accessible and intelligible. It said the structural formula was objective, but was not intelligible to ordinarily lay persons who would require assistance from external agencies or persons, and as such was not self-contained. Now, what is the current status with respect to olfactory marks? The current status is it appears to be absolutely difficult for anyone who wants to get an olfactory mark to satisfy the 7 criteria which was laid out in the Sykman case. What exactly are those criteria? That a mark needs to be clear, precise, self-contained, easily accessible, intelligible, durable, and objective. As most olfactory marks do not meet these requirements, it might actually be difficult to represent it as being capable of graphically being represented. Secondly, we will discuss about color marks. Now, what is the problem with color marks? The biggest problem with color marks is usually the shade confusion. There are different shades of the same color. How do public actually identify with different shades of colors? Would they actually treat it as a mark in itself? The other concern with using colors as trademarks is the possibility of color depletion. That is, if a monopoly is granted to owner of a particular color, then no other person can actually use the color. This basically kind of means that there's likely to be very limited number of colors that is available for traders to be used on their goods as such. An important case in this regard is Libertel Group versus Benelux. This was an application meant to register the color orange. The court held that single color marks are actually capable of constituting a sign and are eligible for trademark protection if they can distinguish goods of one undertaking from those of another and can be defined in a sufficiently clear way. To be acceptable, graphical representation of the color must be clear, precise, self-contained, easily accessible, intelligible, durable, and objective. Basically, the court reiterated the Sykman criteria as discussed in the Sykman case. This condition may be satisfied by designating that the color using an internationally recognized identification code such as Pantone is a precise and stable form of verbal description of the color. So basically, when you're actually claiming a color mark, it not only needs to meet the Sykman criteria, but the color needs to be clearly identifiable in terms of an recognized international code. Right? So while considering the registration of the color per se as trademark, private interest of a single trader has to be weighed against the public interest of not unduly restricting the availability of colors for all traders.